funny, Ambassador. I had the chance to visit Geilenkirchen many years ago with the NATO AWACS, and of course they have the Luxembourg emblem on them, which is a kind of fun thing.
We showed them in the PowerPoint.
Oh, good, excellent. Well, I think we should be live. So it's an absolute pleasure to all of those who are joining us today. My name is Robert Baines. I am the president of the NATO Association of Canada, a charitable NGO that is devoted to informing Canadians about the value of security and the importance of NATO. Most Canadians don't have to think about security on a day-to-day basis, and that is a true gift. NATO is one of the premier institutions that allows us to forget about security. So at the same time, we need to remember it every once in a while to ensure that we do not get lost in appreciating what we have. And today, one of our goals is to make sure that we realize what our allies are doing. What are the thoughts of our allies? What does alliance mean for them? Today we have a wonderful ambassador, the ambassador of Luxembourg, to discuss with us some of those issues. So I will introduce Maria Zelenova, who is one of our program editors at the NATO Association of Canada. Maria, please introduce the ambassador and we can start our questions.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the series of events discussing the future of North Atlantic cooperation. As Robert said, my name is Maria, and I am a research analyst and ambassador coordinator at the NATO Association. And we are a non-for-profit organization aimed at educating Canadians on the value of security and importance of NATO. We are honored to be joined today by His Excellency Gaston Stronck, the ambassador of Luxembourg to Canada. Ambassador Stronck started his career in academia, serving as visiting professor at the European Institute of Public Administration, Maastricht, and a lecturer at the National Administration Institute Luxembourg between 1992 and 2002. He was also awarded Doctor Honoris Causa at the Moscow State Linguistic University in 2010. Between 1989 and 1993, Ambassador Stronck worked at the Development Cooperation Directorate at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Luxembourg, subsequently moving on to the position of Deputy Director for Development and Coordination. He held that position until 1995, at which point he became Deputy Permanent Representative of Luxembourg to the Western European Union. Thereafter, he served as Permanent Representative of Luxembourg to the Political and Security Committee of the European Union, as well as Permanent Representative of Luxembourg to the Western European Union. In 2003, he took on the position of Ambassador of Luxembourg to Denmark and the Ambassador of Luxembourg to Finland, Norway, and Sweden as non-resident. In 2007, Ambassador Stronck took over as Ambassador of Luxembourg to Russia, and in 2011 as Ambassador to India. He went on to become Director of European Affairs and International Relations at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and European Affairs, and the Secretary General of Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs. Currently, Ambassador Stronck serves as the Ambassador of Luxembourg to Canada and the United States. And I remind all our attendees that you're welcome to take a look at his full bio on our Eventbrite link. And after that lengthy introduction, Ambassador, I will now pass it on to you for your remarks. I believe you have a PowerPoint presentation prepared, so we'll have that ready to go. And over to you, Ambassador.
Thank you, Robert, for the introduction. Thank you, Maria, for the nice words. And yes, it's an entire lifespan, almost. And c'est aussi un grand plaisir de vous saluer en français. Le Luxembourg étant un pays francophone, je souhaite dire que je suis très ravi aujourd'hui d'être avec l'Association canadienne pour l'OTAN. So we agreed that I would say a few words about the Canadian-Luxembourg history and Canadian-Luxembourg relationship, and then move on to what we do in NATO and the perspectives of the organization. So if we take the next slide, let me first say that we had Luxembourg immigrants to Canadian in the 18th century. For Luxembourg, 1/3 of the population left the country and immigrated to the United States. They went to Wisconsin, they went to Illinois, they went to Minnesota, and they went to Iowa. And many of them moved later to Canada. So we have a Luxembourg immigration to Canada. And recently I found a small place called Luxembourg in Ontario. So I still have to check what it is and how it's related to Luxembourg. The more recent history, Second World War, 10th of May 1940, Luxembourg was invaded by the German troops and the royal family left the country. They chose the road to Portugal and from Portugal to Washington and from Washington to Montreal. So Canada has been a terre d'accueil for the royal house and contributing to have our royal family in a safe place and guaranteeing by that the continuity of the state and the monarchy. So Grand Duchess Charlotte lived in the Manoir de Marcouche many years during the Second World War before moving to London close to the end of the war. Her two sons, Prince Jean in those days, later Grand Duke Jean, studied in Montreal. They were at Laval, and his brother too. They got a French education, and they kept the ties with Canada. Grand Duke Jean became Doctor Honoris Causa at the Laval University in 2007. I don't see moving the slides, Maria. If that does not work, it does not matter. I just will continue. Well, yes, that's what I just explained. And you saw a picture of Marcouche. I'm in contact with the Marcouche History Society to see how we can take the memories to the next generation. Now, the more recent history, Roland Michener, who was Governor General in the 70s, he was the first Governor General to have state visits outside Canada, and this first state visit ever of a Governor General took place in April 71 to Luxembourg, Belgium, and the Netherlands. And for the more recent context, next slide, please. Prime Ministers Trudeau and Bettel met in April 2017, and we had a very good exchange on our bilateral relations, and Foreign Ministers Freeland and Asselborn met in July 2019. That was the conference of Toronto on the Ukraine, and we had good bilateral meetings in the framework of this conference and signed a number of bilateral agreements, notably the one on working holidays. Let's move to trade. The trade figures are not so important. You see from Canada to Luxembourg about 100 million euro in 2020, a little bit more from Luxembourg to Canada. What is in the 100 million euro? It's mainly 11 Q400 Luxair flies Canadian planes, and we are very satisfied with Canadian technology. And for the Luxembourg exports to Canada, it's mainly steel products. So, Luxembourg, next slide, please. Luxembourg companies in Canada. I don't know if you know the brands. SES is very famous. It's a global player, the biggest satellite provider in the world. They own with Borealis Infrastructure. They own Ciel Satellite Group in Canada. Cargolux is the biggest cargo-only company, one of the biggest cargo-only companies in the world. They fly twice a week to Calgary, so bringing European products to Canada and exporting Canadian products all over the world. ArcelorMittal is a Luxembourg headquartered company. It's born out of a takeover from Mittal of the Arcelor Group, and the main component of the Arcelor Group was Arbet, the very big Luxembourg steel industry. They own Dofasco, which is 5,000 employments in Hamilton, 4.5 million tons of steel every year. They own the ArcelorMittal mine in Canada and the ArcelorMittal infrastructure in North Quebec. So ArcelorMittal has a strong presence in Canada. And then I would like to mention Apatec, its water treatment technology in close cooperation with Black Opal and fluid clarification in Canada. The Canadian companies in Luxembourg, that's the next slide. We have Husky. I think Husky is better known in Luxembourg than it is in Canada. It's a very modern infrastructure for injection molding. I think a few hundred employments in Luxembourg. You see the picture of the factory, it's rather big. We have open text in Luxembourg. We have Kobo in Luxembourg. Here on the slide, you don't see North Star Ciel et Terre, which is a space company active in Luxembourg. And of course, Luxembourg is a huge financial center. RBC has a strong presence in Luxembourg, including Ivanhoe and Dundee, which are private wealth managers. So. And then next slide, obviously we come to services because I mentioned the banks. From Canada to Luxembourg, 416 million, of which 21 million financial services. From Luxembourg to Canada, 508 million, of which 304 million in financial services. And the next slide, and there it really gets interesting. Canada and Luxembourg foreign direct investment accumulated to 12 billion from Canada to Luxembourg, 6.5 billion from Luxembourg to Canada. Luxembourg is the third investor in Canada after the United States and the Netherlands, and Canada is the third investor in Luxembourg after the United States and the UK. Of course, we are a small country. Canada is a very big country, but this shows how important the Luxembourg Financial Center is and how the Canadian financial service providers use Luxembourg as a platform for doing business. So then let's move to university cooperation. We have a wonderful, very young, multilingual, international, focused on research university in Luxembourg. It was founded in 2003. 15,000 students, 300 professors, 300 lecturers. We have with Stefan Palage, a rector at the university that comes from Canada. He was previously professor at the University of Quebec. And we have, as you see, 9 bilateral agreements, MOUs with Canadian universities. You see Laval, obviously, because we have this historic ties with Laval. You see the French-speaking universities from Quebec and Montreal, but also all the other ones. So it's a very good cooperation. Then let's move to defense, which is the subject of the presentation and my presence today. The Luxembourg Defense Guidelines were published in 2000, a few years ago, and they stand for 2025 and beyond. We want to be relevant and visible. Remember, we are small, so that is not self-evident. We want to have operational and deployable capabilities. We want to contribute to common and collective defense. We want to be able to contribute to crisis management missions and rapid reaction groups. And we do this within NATO and the European Union, and we do it with our key partners, Belgium, the Netherlands, France, and Germany. The defense spending, that's the next slide. We are not very good in spending. Military expenditure never has been very popular in Luxembourg. So we are unfortunately the lowest. We have the lowest level in NATO with 0.6 of GDP. Here we have, of course, we stick to the 2% target. We take it step by step. And here you see the programming from 2020 to 2024 with a slight modification due to COVID. I mean, COVID is quite a problem for public spending, but as you see, we try to keep the track and to increase the defense spending. The next slide is quite important. I took it from a NATO report. You have on the bottom, you see the defense expenditures as percentage of the GDP. And on the left, you have the equipment expenditures as percentage of defense expenditure. And you see, of course, because we have in terms of defense expenditures as a percentage of GDP, we are very low. So we are to the left, but we are on the top when it comes to investments in equipment, and by far. And you see how other countries are positioned. So at least we have one good result to show, that is the recent new investments in modern defense equipment. And I can explain you why we do it in the next slide. So we are a founding member of NATO. We are a reliable ally. We participate in NATO missions. We have been participating and continue to participate in the Resolute Support mission in Afghanistan. We are participating in the enhanced forward presence with the presence in Lithuania. We are part of the very high readiness joint task force within NAF. And we offer, and I think that's beyond boots on the ground, we offer niche capabilities that are desperately sometimes needed within the NATO missions. And one of our good qualifications is satellite communications. So also secure satellite communications, and we offer that for the NATO operation missions in Iraq, Kosovo, and Afghanistan. We are part of the multi-road tanker transport within NATO. It's air-to-air refueling, and with the A330, and Luxembourg has recently acquired an Airbus 400M. So we are not only infantry troops, we have an air force with this very remarkable transporter, strategic transporter, which is of course available for NATO operations. So the next slide, please. So we need to spend more. We need more resources. We need more diversification in our army. So we traditionally were in reconnaissance. So therefore, you see the reconnaissance tools like the drones. But beyond that, you see here satellite communication. You see air-to-air refueling. You see the A400M. And you see in the middle of the page, one of the new initiatives of Luxembourg, that would be a full-fledged military hospital that we would set up, and that would be also an element of our contribution to NATO. So next slide, please. Yes, we talked about it just before. The NATO AWACS fleet is registered in Luxembourg. When the AWACS fleet needed to be registered, there were complicated judicial problems with a lot of other member states, and we were the only one, because in those days we had no air component of our army. We were the only one to offer a complete registry. So you see on the AWACS supporting E3A, you see the Luxembourg Red Lion. Next slide then. Yes, quite important, not well known. We have a NATO agency in Luxembourg. It's the NATO Support and Procurement Agency, which is, of course, linked to the NSPO, the organization. The NATO Support and Procurement Agency brings together in a single organization acquisition, logistic, medical, and infrastructural capabilities, operational and system support, and services to the allies, NATO military authorities, and partner nations. It's quite a bigger organization and growing very fast that is offering the services to the member states. So international human resources, and of course also quite a number of Canadians. Next slide. Within the NATO, we have a very good cooperation. My deputy head of mission here from Washington last year became deputy head of mission in NATO, and she told me that we are like-minded on many issues, and we have a very good cooperation within human security, in particular women, peace, and security, which is a working group headed by Canada, and we have a good and close cooperation on climate change and security and how it's related to defense. And then the last slide would be more on a personal note. I myself was a military officer before I came to the diplomacy, and in those days the Luxembourg Army was member of the Allied Command Europe Mobile Force, the AMF, which is the predecessor of NRF, the NATO Rapid Reaction Force. In those days, it was headquartered in Heidelberg, and I remember when I was a young lieutenant, I had a Canadian general. I was serving under a Canadian general, and even more interesting, we had our operations, our training in the far north, and we had the complete Canadian collective and individual winter warfare equipment. And I show you the Canadian combat rations here. I cannot tell you how many of them I had, and they were very good. And they were very good in the far north when we were training with the Canadian troops, with the US and the other partners in the northern part of Norway, close to those days the Soviet border. So that on a person, on a person note. So, and we take the last slide, which is for Q&A. Merci beaucoup. Just one word to say on NATO. NATO is an important organization today. We speak about the United Nations, we speak about the European Union, we speak about the Council of Europe, we speak about the OECD, but NATO is essential. I remember when the Soviet Union collapsed and when the Iron Wall came down, there were a lot of academic activities, and even politicians said that now that the Warsaw Pact has gone, we do not need NATO anymore. Well, it was totally wrong, and NATO is important and even more important today than it ever was. Of course, it's not the same NATO that we had 20, 30 years ago. NATO has to adopt. We have to take into consideration the new threats, the new risks, but it is an organization that contributes to our freedom, that contributes to our democracies, and that is essential for defending our values. So that on a last remark before we go to the questions and answers.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. That was a fantastic presentation, and thank you so much for sharing your insight into the relationship between Canada and Luxembourg. So we do have some prepared questions for you before we take questions from the audience. And I would just like to remind everyone in our chat that you are welcome to ask your questions in the YouTube chat beside the live stream, and we will get to them after we get through our moderated questions. So our first question is, what does the history of Luxembourg have to teach us about the value of NATO and security?
Yes, a lot. And I have to go back more than 150 years. Luxembourg was, in the middle of the 19th century, an extremely strong fortress. And even today, if you travel to Luxembourg, you will see the remainings of that fortress. And the fortress, everybody wanted to own the fortress, because if you had the fortress, you were able to control the region. And Bismarck and Napoleon III wanted to have Luxembourg, and they had they were close to a war because of Luxembourg. To prevent that war, Luxembourg was invited to a conference in London organized by the powers of the middle of the 19th century. And the result was a Treaty of London from 1867, where Luxembourg was neutralized, a neutral country, and we had to dismantle the fortress. That was nice. We were a small neutral country in the middle of Europe, but in 1914, we were invaded by the Germans, crossing Luxembourg to go to the front in the northern part of France. It was a kind of gentle occupation, but it brought us a lot of trouble after the war. And much worse, on 10th of May 1940, we were invaded by the Nazi troops. And that was not a gentle occupation. That was a rough Gauleiter we had in Luxembourg, imposing the Nazi regime on Luxembourg, deporting the Luxembourg boys to the German army. A lot of harassment about everything. A lot of people died and came to the concentration camps. And we got the lesson. We got the lesson that neutrality is nice to have, but it does not help you. Twice it didn't help us. And our foreign minister, Joseph Bech, understood in 44, 43, 44, very early, that we need to be part of an alliance. So we were founding member of the United Nations. We became founding member of the NATO Treaty. 49, we signed it in Washington. And the lesson is clear. And since 49, we are in good hands. And we are a member of this important alliance that protects our territorial integrity, that it protects our monarchy, that it protects our political system, our values, and the result is extraordinary. The problem is that we tend to forget it, why we are a free and independent, wealthy country in the heart of Europe. Right? We take it as self-evident for now 75 years, 80 years and more that we have this status. But it is not for free. It is because we are a member of an alliance. It is because this is a very good and a very efficient alliance, and we are very grateful to have to be part of this alliance and to have the opportunity to contribute to the well functioning of the alliance. So you never should forget history. I mean, the history tells lessons, and these lessons have to be kept in mind, and that's why I appreciate that I can cooperate with an organization like yours, remembering our young people that that of course a lot of subjects today are important. Climate change is important. Human rights are important. Values are important. But the NATO alliance is very important, and it's the basement of what we do today, each and every day.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. That is indeed very important, that it is important to remind ourselves about the importance of NATO alliance, especially as security relations between countries are always changing and the importance of the alliance evolves along with that. Our next question is, Luxembourg and Canada have long enjoyed a closed, multifaceted friendship, as we have seen from your presentation. How would you define this bilateral relationship?
Well, the bilateral relations are very, very friendly. We are, as I said in my presentation, like-minded on many subjects, not only within NATO, but in the international fora, within the United Nations, within the OECD. We have very often exactly the same lines. Geographically, we are far from each other. Canada is very big, Luxembourg is small, but that does not prevent us from having this excellent bilateral cooperation. We need to develop it. For my ambition, I think the trade figures are too low. I hope that CETA will contribute to develop this, to improve this economic relationship. It's very good, as you saw, in services and financial relations, but in the field of trade, more can be done. And I'm very glad to have this agreement of what we call on working holidays, which allows students to stay in Luxembourg and Luxembourg students to stay in Canada after their studies and to get the experience of living a few years within the society without complicated visa arrangements. Unfortunately, much more Luxembourgers benefit from it than Canadians. And despite COVID, the young Luxembourgers, they enjoy to study in Canada. We have many in Montreal, obviously, and that is building the future. So the young people of tomorrow are the CEOs, the politicians of young people of today are CEOs and the politicians of tomorrow, and it's good for our bonds and relationships.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And our next question is, in times of peace, those who are dedicated to the rules-based international order have to reaffirm that they are willing to stand up for multilateralism, as we've already talked throughout our presentation. How can Luxembourg and Canada grow multilateral support from their citizens? And what challenges do you anticipate in growing this multilateral support?
Well, we have seen with the last year in the United States how important multilateralism is. No single country in this world can solve a problem alone. Take international security, take the fight against terrorism, take the fight against climate change. Nobody, not a single country, can handle these issues alone. So we need to cooperate, and of course, United Nations is a very important forum. We really welcome the return of the United States to the UN institutions, notably the WHO, but also the Human Rights Committee. So, and that's good. That's good. And I think Canada and Luxembourg, we have been trying to convince the United States to stay connected, to be within the multilateral organizations, and it's good to have them back. And we stand ready to cooperate and to find solutions together. Climate change, of course, is very important. The Paris Agreement are important. The United States will host a summit in the coming days, preparing the Glasgow meeting. It is very important. Nobody could act alone on climate change. And what would it have if you would act alone? So multilateralism in today's world is essential. And NATO is part of multilateralism, such as the EU and the other maybe smaller organizations, but they all have their role to play. And as we said, I think Canada and Luxembourg, we are good examples of countries contributing to the multilateral system, and we should continue to do so. And if I look at the number, for example, of resolutions within the United Nations that are supported by Canada and the EU, including Luxembourg, they are numerous, and they illustrate how close this cooperation is.
Thank you, Ambassador. And to piggyback on that question, on the question of multilateralism, the COVID-19 pandemic has absolutely changed the world as we know it. What do you think is the biggest impact of the pandemic on the way that diplomacy is conducted? And moreover, as we are looking at the world after the pandemic, how do you think the conduct of diplomacy is going to change as the world moves out of it?
Diplomacy is a face-to-face business. And I like to be with you today on Zoom, but I would much more prefer to be in Ottawa and to speak in a conference room to you directly, to take you to a lunch after that, and to continue the exchange and to build up these relationships that are so important in the diplomatic world. So I hope the pandemic will be over and that we can be back to a more or less normal regime, that I can travel to Canada, that I can meet my counterparts at Global Affairs, that I can meet my Luxembourg counterparts. We have an excellent network of honorary consuls in Canada. They are my partners, and it's important to me. And it's important not only to be in Ottawa, I need to be in Montreal, I need to be in Quebec City, I need to be in Toronto because it's the financial center of Canada. I would like to go to Calgary if Targolux is flying twice a week to Calgary, and why not traveling to British Columbia and see what we can do with in Vancouver. So there's so much to do, and the pandemic is preventing us from doing it. And I'm looking forward to the opening after the pandemic. But as I said. And what I learned from the pandemic is that in diplomacy, diplomacy is building trust. Diplomacy is building relationships, and you cannot build a relationship through a Zoom or a WebEx meeting. I mean, if you know your colleagues from before and you have a Zoom or WebEx meeting, it's okay. But how to meet somebody in the corridors and having a cup of coffee, or how to meet for a lunch or for a dinner to build up this network that we desperately need in diplomacy. That's not possible. So I look at the comeback of diplomacy after the pandemic very much.
Thank you very much. And I would tend to agree. I think Zoom certainly cannot replace those face-to-face interactions. And I think we all eagerly wait for the day when we can return back to normal work. On the topic of COVID, our next question is, Luxembourg has had a lot more success in flattening the COVID curve than its European counterparts. What factors have contributed to this success, and what can other countries around the world learn from Luxembourg's example?
Well, it's good to hear that we have been successful. I would not tend to believe that. We have had quite a strong impact of COVID in Luxembourg. We had the first wave, okay, that was new. We tried to handle it. The second wave was quite strong. The third wave is in the way, fully developing now. It's not easy in Luxembourg. I think we are a small country in the heart of Western Europe. We have open borders. We have 200 commuters coming every day from France, Germany, and Belgium. 100,000 from France, 50,000 from Germany, 50,000 from Belgium every day. Luxembourg is known for the traffic jams. So, but you see, in a situation like that, we were in 1867 when we had the fortress, the most important place in that region. We still are the most important place today. We are very attractive because we have this economic success. We offer jobs, we offer technology, everything is there. And then, of course, in a scenario like that, it's very difficult to fight the pandemic because we live with the fact that the borders are open. We live with the fact that we have Schengen. We live with the reality, thanks God, that everybody can move in and out Luxembourg without any control. And in the early phase of the first wave of COVID, Germany imposed the closure of borders. We really had to fight to keep them open because we cannot afford anymore to have closed borders. I mean, the Luxembourg economy would collapse. The entire region would collapse. So, but the one argument why we did well, rather well, is that of course we have a state-of-the-art medical system. We have a perfect medical insurance system. The hospitals and the medical system, they were quite well prepared. And people, the Luxembourgers, well, they are not as disciplined as the Germans maybe are, but they are very disciplined. If the government tells them to wear a mask, we will wear a mask. If we were told to stay at home, we will stay at home. Of course, we have those who don't like to do it and don't like to hear it. We have them everywhere, but until now we were quite lucky, and we come out of this pandemic with very good figures with very good economic data. So we have only 1.9% of setback in the economy, which is the lowest figure in Europe. Only 1.9, which means that financial services are quite resilient when it comes to pandemics. Also, it's one of the explanations, of course.
Thank you very much. Yeah, there's many different explanations, and if there's anything this pandemic taught us is that it's definitely not a symmetric crisis, and different countries have different capacities to handle it. So it's always very interesting to learn from Luxembourg's example, for sure. Our next question is, are there any specific disinformation campaigns that have targeted Luxembourg citizens, and what challenges does this present in the future?
No, we are not victims of, I would call, disinformation campaigns like we have them with the Baltic states, Poland, or with Germany. We don't feel in a Russian target or a Chinese target. Of course, we have our challenges with the new hybrid and cyber threats, without any doubt, but we have not been targeted. I don't know if you refer to Open Lux, maybe. Of course, the Luxembourg Financial Center is under pressure from time to time, but I think that Luxembourg is fully in line and compliant with all EU and international regulations and transparency standards when it comes to financial services. So we are disproportionately big when it comes to financial services. If you look at the figures, we are globally number 2 when it comes to investment funds. The United States are number 1, but serving essentially the domestic market. The Luxembourg investment funds are cross-border funds, and we have had a lot of success with the legal structure, with the services and the know-how we offer. And then, of course, you get criticism and you get competition, and competition is not always fair. We are very open. What we want is a level playing field. We have always been first movers when it came to international action. You have heard about the recent proposals of the US Treasury, Janet Yellen, when it comes to minimal corporate tax that we need to put in place. Negotiations are underway within the OECD, and we will be supporting this. The only thing we need is a level playing field. If we have a level playing field, we will be always a very competitive, dynamic financial center. At this moment, we are number one when it comes to sustainable bonds. We are number one when it comes to green finance. And we have well-developed financial products to invest in the fight against climate change. So that's all nice. So, but we do not feel the target when it comes to disinformation. So definitely not. But I have a lot of understanding for our Baltic friends or other countries when they feel under pressure. And I think the policy we have in place within NATO and within the EU is good, needs to be development, and we cannot tolerate this attacks.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I have one more question before we move on to live questions from the chat. And so with that, I would just like to remind everyone in the audience that you're welcome to ask the ambassador question in the YouTube chat, and I will get to it after this question. My last question is, without a doubt, you've had a very exciting diplomatic career spanning across different countries. What would you say are some of the notable highlights, and what do you think, what would you consider to be your greatest achievement in your career?
Well, that's a very difficult question, but it's a good question. It obliges me to think about what I have done or what I have not done. Yes, but in my younger years, I was in development cooperation, you said, and Luxembourg has no colonial past, and we haven't had extensive ties with the developing world in Africa or Latin America. And when I entered the ministry, I got the unique opportunity of shaping this policy, contributing to defining what we do. And what I did is setting up drafting the law in an extremely generous system for NGOs, for Luxembourg NGOs, and co-financing systems. And it has proved to be so efficient. And of course, I had the opportunity to travel to a lot of development countries in those days. In Africa, we had the privileged partnership with Cabo Verde, with Senegal, with Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso. And I'm also quite, proud is too much, but satisfied to have chosen women as partners. You won't believe it. Yes, no, you will believe it. But work with women in developing countries and you have results. And you have a practical, there is no nonsense approach. And what we did was directly beneficial to the people. And that's something I really appreciate. And I thought I have contributed my very little share to that in shaping our policy in a good way. For the rest, you get involved in this multilateral mechanisms within the EU. Yes, I mean, you get absorbed by the system. But that one, I think, was probably the most important one, having a good system for Luxembourg NGOs, and is still producing positive impacts, I think.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And with that, I would like to move on to questions from our audience. So the first question from the audience is, what are the greatest opportunities for growing the cooperation and the relationship between Canada and Luxembourg in the future?
I think the greatest opportunity that we need to tackle is trade. The trade figures are too low. CETA offers new opportunities. We should convince our companies to look at the respective markets. So from our perspective, what I do and I try to implement is to convince our companies that Canada is a potential and important business partners beyond what we have. SES, ArcelorMittal, Cargolux are global players. They would not need a diplomatic action to be successful in Canada. But we have a lot of small and medium sized companies with a lot of good products that could be interested in Canada, that could cooperate with Canadian companies, and that could have an access to the Canadian market. And then the other way around, we have to take it into consideration too, because I think for Canadian companies, mainly even more after Brexit, Luxembourg is an excellent place to enter the European Union. Now geographically, we are well located. From Luxembourg, you can distribute your products and services within the internal market of the European Union. That is more than 400 million consumers. And Luxembourg is a good place because we have state-of-the-art logistics. You can reach the entire union with your product or services within minutes today when it comes to services, between 48 hours when it comes to products. And we try to be as helpful as we can for Canadian companies to choose Luxembourg as their platform. So there's a lot to do, and that would be to our mutual benefit. And then I wish to have more exchange between the young people. The working holidays are very good. We need to go beyond that. I think I have no problems to convince young Luxembourgers to look at Canada, because Canada is such a beautiful country, and from east to west and from the south to the north, such beautiful places to offer very good education, very good opportunities. But I wish to have more Canadians in Luxembourg, and also to take Luxembourg as a platform for discovering the neighboring countries and the rest of Europe. So there's a lot of work to be done. Cultural activities. We are a very active participant in all the film festivals in Canada. We have a small but very vibrant film industry, so you can have Luxembourg movies from time to time. I think you can on Netflix. You can have even the first Luxembourg crime series. You can watch them in Canada. But we need more Canadian culture in Luxembourg. My colleagues, the previous ambassador and the new ambassador, they are very active, and but you see clearly the opportunities. It's trade, it's culture, and it's young people.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Our next question is, what is the current relationship between Luxembourg and China?
Yeah, that's a good question and a complicated one. We have a very good relationship with China. Traditionally, since many years, we fully respect the One China policy. We have been active in China more than 100 years ago. Quite some part of the Chinese steel industry is Luxembourg know-how. We had Luxembourg engineers traveling to China before the First World War and bringing to China the state-of-the-art steel producing technology from Luxembourg. So we have these ties that are more than 100 years ago. China uses Luxembourg as a platform for doing businesses in Europe, not more, not less than with our neighboring countries. But when it comes to the financial center, we have 7, 8 Chinese banks in Luxembourg for financing Chinese businesses in Europe. Now, of course, I'm very aware of the position of the former US administration and the new US administration. I closely follow the complicated relation between Canada and China and the two Michaels, and we fully support the Canadian diplomacy on this very dramatic case. It's totally unacceptable that citizens are taken hostage just because of political motives. The situation in Hong Kong is not good. The situation in the provinces when it comes to the Uyghurs is not good. The Chinese are very aggressive when they act in the Chinese Sea. They are building up military power. The Chinese are extremely aggressive when it comes to trade. When I was Secretary General, I was participating in the great Belt and Road Conference in Beijing. It was impressive the way they outreach to the world. I have been traveling to Africa many times. You see the Chinese, they are present everywhere. They don't respect the rules. If you look at the copyright, they don't respect the basic rules of trademarks and copyrights. They don't offer access to their markets, and they protect their markets while ours are open. So we need to have a stronger policy regarding China. And I think I mentioned the like-minded approach that we have in foreign policy. We are fully in line with Canada on this. We are fully in line with the United States on this. But in Europe, we have to how to say, to measure the balance. If you look at the Chinese investments in Europe, if you look, that would be not the worst. Anyway, we have now the investment screening through in a regulatory framework set up by the European Union, so the Chinese cannot invest as they did before. But much more complicated is the Chinese market. And if you look, for example, at any European product, how important the Chinese market is, for example, for German cars, and look at the figures, and then you know what the difficulty are. So we need to hit the balance between a policy where we put the pressure on China when it comes to values, when it comes to the level playing field, when it comes to respecting rules, and we need to keep the canals open when it comes to trade, because China today is such a big economy that our companies cannot not be active on the Chinese market. So, but the trend is clear. It's not the China policy we had 10 years ago. We have learned the lessons. Everybody knows that today the time is different, and you followed the meeting in Anchorage. The tone is different. The Chinese, they gained a lot of confidence. They behave in a way they didn't behave 10 or 15 years ago. And it's a challenge, and we need to stand together, the EU with United States and Canada to implement this new flexible China policy and strategy.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And our next question is, what are some areas that Canada and Luxembourg can increase their cooperation specifically on security issues? Which I think blends well with the China question as well.
Yes, I think I mentioned the three areas before, but they were not related to security. When it comes more particularly to security, I think we really should go deeper into space. Space is important in Luxembourg. Some people would argue that we take more space in space than on the globe, and that's probably true. If you look at the number of Luxembourg satellites in the air and the ambitions we have. I mentioned North Star, one of the Canadian companies active in Luxembourg when it comes to space resources. Luxembourg has a very forward-looking space policy. And we started to put this in place five years ago, not much longer before, by having a closer look at the future in space, and more particularly space resources. Space resources is not science fiction. It may sound like science fiction, but the day will come 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, where the humanity has to exploit space resources to survive on our globe. So it is, I think it's vital. We need to plan it very early, and Luxembourg has had a very advanced law that gave an extremely large interpretation to the Outer Space Treaty of the United Nations. The Outer Space Treaty of the United Nations is an old treaty dating from the 70s, 60s, I think, and nobody 50 years ago, 60 years ago, thought about the possibility that space resources could be exploited. So the treaty is silent on space resources. And we gave a larger interpretation within the treaty to the way space resources could be exploited, arguing that if you fly to the space, And if you're able to collect space resources, they are yours. And that makes and we put it in the law, and that makes Luxembourg very attractive for companies investing today in research for space resources and in planning space resources in the coming years. This law is even more advanced than the US law. We were really a first mover, and that attracted so much interest to Luxembourg that a lot of space companies came to Luxembourg, not only space resources companies, but a lot of companies developing technology for space activities. We have now 40, 50 space companies. It's already 2% of our GDP. And looking forward to cooperate with Canada. And when you talk space, you cannot not talk about security. Space and security are intrinsically linked without any doubt. And we have a close cooperation with the United States on space. It's remarkable for a small country like mine to be active in this area with the biggest player in the world. We signed 2-3 years ago an MOU on space with the United States, and not without any surprise, we were invited by Nato with 5 other countries to be part of the moon mission, the Artemis mission. So we will have Luxembourg technology on the moon within one of the next Artemis mission. Canadians are active in Luxembourg in space. I think we should develop this more. And if I had the opportunity to travel to Ottawa, of course, one of my first trips would have been to the competent authorities related to space, the ministries, but also the agency, to take this matter forward and to look how we can cooperate. Again, that is security and space inevitably linked. And yes, I hope still it can be done. It will be done.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador, for your remarks. And I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. I would like to thank you again for joining us today. That was a fascinating discussion on Luxembourg and Canada. And it's very interesting to listen from your personal diplomatic experience. And I would like to thank everyone in the audience for joining us today as well. And with that, I will now pass it on to Robert Baines.
Thank you, Maria. I would like to give kudos to you as well for moderating a great discussion. And Ambassador, I can't thank you enough. What a joy to speak with you and to hear a little bit about Luxembourg's history and the knowledge of going through a time of neutrality and realizing that as virtuous and wonderful an idea as that is, it does not maintain peace in the same way that strength does, that an organized institution such as NATO and many others in the rules-based international order can maintain. So really great to kind of hear those stories. And I do hope that in the future we will be able to see you again, whether that be in Luxembourg or who knows where else on the world. It's wonderful to have a partner like you fighting the good fight and trying to make sure that those of us who expect security understand that you cannot expect it without the outlay of effort and collaboration in the way that NATO does. So thank you so much, Ambassador.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. Thank you, Maria. For me, this was an excellent opportunity, and I'm very grateful. Yeah, we keep in touch, and we will further promote multilateralism, the Atlantic Treaty, and NATO, and the bilateral Canada-Luxembourg friendship. So thank you very much, and have a nice day.
And for those of you who are looking to continue this conversation, the NATO Association puts on weekly Zooms, and with the rest of our NATO ambassadors, we'll be keeping on the discussion. So please do subscribe to us on YouTube and watch out for further events on social media.